Welcome to the Tapestry Podcasts. We are your hosts today, Stacy and Aguilar, and our secret behind-the-scenes member of our podcast team, Nolan Chen, is here.
Hey, everyone.
This is our first episode of the Mission Sermon Series, and on today's episode, we are going to be having a conversation with Chen about missions. So let's introduce our guest.
Eden, I met you at a missions dinner we were all having at Shireen's house, and it was great. You are a business owner, an entrepreneur, a husband, father, and on the board of Pioneers and a member of Tapestry. Welcome, Eden.
Thanks for having me. This is fun.
We're so excited to have you. What happened was I saw Eden also in our marital panel, him and his beautiful wife, Carolyn, and I was like, oh my gosh, I need to have them on the podcast. They're amazing. But want to ask you both, how did you guys hear about Tapestry and what brought you to stay and be committed to be a Tapestry member?
For myself, I moved down to LA about 8 months ago. I had been living in SF and really wanted to actually live with a person that I knew well, because I was living, not with random people, but just with all sorts of different people. And so I really wanted to, live with someone I knew. So I moved down to LA because my best friend that I'd grown up with, David Tran, we've known each other about 20 years, he had a place and a room available. So I asked him if I could move in and talked with him, asked him what church he was going to, and it was Tapestry. And I think my first week that I was here, it was the faith and sexuality course that was going on.
Yeah.
And I got to listen to just the panelists speak, and I was like, wow, Tapestry is willing to talk about the hard things and have a place where people that disagreed with one another were able to talk and have a really good dialogue. And I felt like a church that provided a place that was able to do that, was like a healthy church. And so I just kept going since then.
Okay, Eden, tell us.
Yeah, I spoke at a Faith and Work event years ago. I'd never heard of Tapestry before. I just thought this was like a auditorium to speak to some people. And there was a speaker lunch upstairs, and I'm a weird person in that I like walking around and meeting people, and I can sometimes be outgoing. So I walked around and started chatting with some folks that were on a short-term missions planning trip for a summer, and really reminded me a lot of the church I grew up in. And as we were transitioning to a new house and a new season of life, I just had this seed that was planted in my mind from that one encounter. I think maybe during that time I started listening to some sermons. We started praying about it, and it's a pretty different church than where we came out of. It took a little adjustment, especially for Carolyn, but we're glad to be here now.
My husband and I actually helped start the church. We were part of the church plant, so it was really fun and exciting. Random fun fact, my husband was the first non-Asian member of Tapestry, so that's why I'm very passionate about the diversity aspect. Okay, so on today's episode, we really want to unpack what it means to be invited as believers into living into God's story of restoring all of his people back into his kingdom, and how our role is to basically be people who announce God's kingdom, right? One of my favorite, sayings or mission statements is from Wheaton, my alma mater, shout out. But we always say for Christ and his kingdom, and our life should be just screaming that from the top of our lungs, that we are all for Christ. All about our life is about proclaiming his kingdom, announcing the coming of his true kingdom. And sometimes we have missionaries like our really good friends, Hannah and Jacob Chang, who are field workers sent out to Japan. But of course, we are called to live in a manner that is proclaiming of Christ's kingdom wherever we are. And so sometimes we have this incorrect understanding that missions is only for the summer, like STM, or it's only a special calling for a special group of extra super holy people. But one of the things that at Tapestry we want to be really mindful of is that every single member at Tapestry, every single Christian is to proclaim the kingdom of God. So this is kind of a hard question to start off with, but Eden, what does that look like for you? And you mentioned a little bit about you living in South Central, so I kind of want you to share a little bit of that story. In that as well. How did that come about?
Yeah, that's a funny story. So my wife and I, we grew up doing a lot of inner city missions at our church that we grew up in, so Chinese church in Maryland. So my wife and I, we grew up together, so know each other for more than 20 years. I lived in New York for a little bit after school, and then I moved to LA, and we'd always lived in normal middle income cities, parts of the city, whether in New York or LA. And had a thought in my mind after we got married that was just a weird seed of a thought that, oh, wouldn't it be cool to go back and live in more of a lower income neighborhood? And the thinking was a few things. Like, first, I think a lot about initiating my faith when I have conversations with people. And I noticed that one thing that a lot of people ask is, where do you live when you first meet somebody? And just the silly act of being able to say I live in South Central was something that I felt would be a conversation starter and would lead to interesting conversations. So there's that. There's also just the idea that I had been part of bigger churches and things like that, and I was really focused on work at the time, and I really felt like I wanted a place where I could not have to talk a lot about work at the time, and actually flip-flopped on that now in terms of I want to be more integrated. But at the time, I was burned out about talking about work. And so I wanted to just be around people that were just there to worship God. And I think there's something to the fact that people that don't have a lot end up speaking to people that have a lot in all sorts of different ways and teaching people about the contentment of being a Christian and things like that. So there were just lots of different reasons. I started praying about, God, would you call us to live in another place like South Central, for example? And it wasn't more than probably a week or two when I started praying that I at the time was doing some real estate investing. I had some real estate company, and I had messaged my realtor about looking into some property in Inglewood. She sent me a house in Crenshaw where we ended up moving to, which wasn't that close to Inglewood. So I was like, why did she send me this? So I started researching the area. And at the time, Hyde Park was one of the most dangerous parts of LA. And I had looked into LA Times crime reports, all these kinds of things. And I was like, why did she send me this place? But the house on the outside looked like a really nice house. So I was like, okay, let's just go check it out, learn about a new neighborhood, and it'll be interesting and fun. So we went over there, and we pull up into the house, and the owners of the house are there. Typically, when you buy houses, it's the realtor that's showing the house. You don't meet the owners. And the owner ended up being a church planter, and he was an elder at Cornerstone Simi Valley. So he had knew Francis Chen. So we talked a little bit about, somehow we found out that we were both Christian, and we started talking a little bit about that. And Carolyn and his wife, Sarah, started talking. And so we ended up staying there for 4 or 5 hours.
Wait, is this before kids?
This is before. Yeah, this is like 2014. So our first kid was born in 2018. So anyways, it was long. We ended up staying a long time there. And then their life just looked a lot like the life that we had envisioned. And so anyways, I got back into the car. I mean, we stayed there 4 hours. They had a very open door policy. So people would just walk into the door while we were there, like from the neighborhood. Just random people walking in, kids all over the place. Anyways, we ended up getting back in our car, and we're driving home. And I told Carolyn, I think we should buy the place and move. And I was like, I just told her that I just started praying for this a week or two ago. I was like, what are the chances that the one couple that's here doing church planting we happen to bump into them? I wasn't even looking for. So anyways, it was just such a weird coincidental thing. She was like, you're crazy. We were leading a small group at the time at Reality LA, which is the church we were at the time, and super involved in leadership and things like that. And she was just like, no, that's crazy. And I think the next day she was like, okay, let's do it.
So, okay, there's so many things about this story I want to unpack. But one thing is, as a wife, and yes, you didn't have children yet, but still, and I'm sure you guys were thinking you would probably have children in the near future. How did your wife come to say yes?
I do think that she has a real heart for inner city. She grew up thinking that she was going to be a missionary to some extent. In fact, there's a whole funny story about, we had been dating for a few years, doing mostly long distance, because I graduated college, she was still in college. And I was a terrible boyfriend. I was overworking and wasn't really close with God at the time. And just, wasn't doing a good job leading her at all. And she at one point was like, I don't know if I'm called to be married. Maybe I'm called to be a missionary. But she's always had a heart for like inner city, heart for populations where people are facing injustices and things like that. She ended up working as a nurse in Skid Row for a while. And yeah, so I think so that's part of it was natural passion and heart for that community. And I think she also trusts my judgment a lot. I think she had mentioned this in the marriage panel that we had went through, and it was a weird coincidental thing. I think also just meeting the pastor and his wife and staying there and talking for a while. But yeah, I don't know. She'll probably have other things to say about that. But yeah, we're yeah.
Yeah,
sure.
I think what I'm drawn by that story is that Carolyn was, and maybe I should have just had Carolyn here too, but this idea of like, oh, like I really have this conviction of I'm going to follow God no matter what, even if it means that Eden is no longer part of my story. I want to be part of God's story no matter what. And I just love that conviction.
Yeah, especially when your boyfriend's not a good one.
Yeah.
You're, like, you're more open.
Oh, that's so cool.
When I listen to this story, I also see that something happened. Explain you graduated college and were working a lot. But then you share a story right now about how you were really open to moving and just shaping your entire life by moving to a place that you would never, I probably imagine, never initially thought you would move to.
Yeah.
For the sake of, it sounds like, reaching others and completely situating your life, living incarnationally in that way. I'd love to hear what happened. That's like, people don't just wake up and be like, I just want to move to South Central LA because that would be good. Like, people don't just do that.
Yeah, I think I tend to have a more, I don't want to get not normal to be radical because I feel like the Bible calls us to be radical. But I think I tend to have a personality that feels to some people extreme, and in many ways, not just like with a thing like this, but I think I annually have thoughts about just doing something crazy all the time. And this is just one instance of that. And Carolyn has had to learn to live with that. And I think she has some of that too as well. And she obviously isn't just coerced into doing,
she sounds like
things.
she has her own
she does
stories.
Yeah,
as well.
and in a lot of ways I feel like she's a lot more radical than I am, but I tend to have more of an extreme personality, I would say, too, as well. So I think there's an element of I didn't feel like I was growing in my faith, and I just felt like I had to make a change and do something different. And there's a lot of humbling that happened in that process too, because I think even in moving to a place anywhere, I think there's a lot of sort of savior mentality that we have that is not always healthy. And I think a big part of doing something like that has to be there's so much I can learn from these people. I just watched Dune 2 this past week, and that's a lot of the story. It's this guy, Paul, and he's like living with these like nomadic people, and he's like here to learn about your ways from your people because you have strength. And I think a lot of it for me was that for nine years when we were out there, it was how do we learn about something that we really don't know a lot about, whether it be systemic racism and all the other stuff that happens from an injustice perspective.
And did you have kids while you were in South Central then?
Yeah, so we had our daughter, our firstborn, in 2018, and then Moses, our second, in 2020, and then we just moved 6 months ago.
So can I ask you about that a little bit? Because obviously where you were living, not the safest neighborhood, since you looked up crimes and such. And often as parents, it's so easy for our children to become our idols. And the greatest thing that many of us fear is our children being hurt in any shape or form.
Right.
So how was that like for you and Carolyn?
Yeah, I would say that is not my greatest fear.
Yeah.
I'd say both for us, that's not our greatest fear. I think we actually have much more fear that complacent, safe kind of life leads our kids down a path of destruction at the end of the day.
Yes, I love that.
And so I think there's a couple things. One is that I think the crime part of things is related to a lot of racism at the end of the day. And I mean that in that the crime stats are the crime stats, but most of the crime in a place like that is gang-to-gang violence. I've never heard in 9 years of any instance where some random person was just robbed or there was any violence towards a random person. Not one time of any sort. And so I think the likelihood that you get robbed in Santa Monica is probably just as high as the likelihood that you get robbed in a place like Crenshaw, in my mind. So I think a lot of the issues that I had were more my own racism towards when someone is walking down the street and it's late and they're in a hoodie, what are my reactions as a person? Like, how do what are the thoughts that enter my mind? And they are typically that I feel unsafe. And I really had to think through, like, why do I have those thoughts? And in fact, most of the conversations that I had with people about that exact scenario were conversations where people said that I have a right to feel unsafe because that person is statistically has a higher statistic value of being violent.
Right.
And I've had arguments about this in the past, but in my mind, that is the definition of racism.
Right.
That's the exact definition of racism, is that you have a bias towards someone because of the way they look, and there's no evidence to suggest that that person is dangerous in any way. And again, we had not experienced any danger. And in fact, I think we felt safer in many ways because those neighborhoods tend to be such that everyone knows each other and they look out for each other. I'd give anecdotal stories of the fact that there was one time we had a roof that was like flapping up, and we had a neighbor that just got a ladder, got on a roof and patched it up without even telling me. Like, why is there someone on my roof? And there were times where our car was parked on the wrong side of the road, and they would wake us up at 6:30 a.m. say, you got to move your car, street sweeping. And so people just look out for each other in those neighborhoods. So there is a sense of safety in that. I think a lot of it is just we have to deal with our own racism and combat that. And the other half of that is that I want them to be exposed by things that are different. It actually makes me quite scared. Like, I think the hesitancy that Carolyn and I had coming to a mostly Asian church is, are they going to have the experiences that are different and that cause them to think about things in a different way? Or are they going to be closed-minded? Are they going to seek safety? Are they going to seek these things that the Bible doesn't have a lot of? You know, if you go through like the way that the disciples lived and things like that, they were not doing the types of things that we try to do for our families and our kids. And a lot of the mentors that we've had throughout our lives are ones that were willing to take risks. And typically, in some cases, I'd say in many cases, the result of parents living like they were on fire for Jesus led to kids also downloading some of that DNA.
Yeah.
As opposed to, how many people do you guys know that have Christian parents that live very safe lives, and their kids don't see a lot of evidence in them valuing God, and then those kids are like, if they don't see that, then they just go and do their own thing. So those are the things that, I don't know, there's two separate sides of that too as well. And I think and Carolyn brings this up all the time with me. Right now we're living in a nicer neighborhood, and we're going to mostly Asian church, and she does push on that around, is this okay kind of thing.
Yeah.
So anyways.
That's part of the reason we chose our kids to go to my kids go to a bilingual Spanish school. And there's people have asked, like, why don't you go in your local school, our local Korean bilingual school? And part of the reason is they go to an Asian American church.
Right.
And if I send them to a Korean dual language school, they're just going to be around Koreans. And my kids, Diego is half Latino and half Italian. But when we were reading children's books, and I try to choose books that are diverse, and I have asked my kids who they look like, they always pick the Asian kid.
Yeah.
And I've found that's their identity. We push back, as part of it is making decisions where I have been like, oh, was this a good decision? Because one, it's further away. Yeah. It's a further drive.
Yeah.
Two, it's not rated as high,
sure.
on those numbers.
Yeah.
And then three, ethnically, they are basically the only Korean kids, for sure, the only Asian kids in their classroom.
Yeah.
But it's the long-term investment of understanding their identity and who they are as multicultural people and living in a very diverse, economically diverse, but language diverse and looks diverse. So I love what you're saying as a parent. I think it's such a good, humbling lesson.
Yeah, I think Carolyn brings this up all the time too, because as a parent with kids that go to school, you the natural reaction is for you to compare your parenting with other people's parenting, compare your kids with other people's kids. That's just natural. But yeah, the scary part with all that is we have to always recenter around all these people want to put their kids in all these activities because they think those activities are the things that will make the kids into the people that they want them to be. And we have to always say, what do we want for our kids, for them to know Jesus? What are the decisions that we're making as a family to point them to Jesus? Not put them in dance class, and not that those things are bad, but 5 days a week of mass activities all the time is not going to ultimately produce the thing that we really care about, which is ultimately that they know Jesus. It's easy to just fall into the trap of just following what everyone else is doing as opposed to saying, okay, what do I actually want for my kids? Are they kind? Are they loving? They know who Jesus really is, and what are the decisions that we can make to do that?
Yeah. That's so cool. Can I ask you what brought you out of the inner city and where you are now?
Totally. So yeah, we had been in South LA for 9 years, and one big thing I sort of noted at the beginning, which is that I had been trying to disconnect my work from my church stuff. And there was a few things I noticed. One was that in a predominantly Black neighborhood, like our neighborhood was almost all Black. I think we were like the only Asians in our neighborhood. For sure the only Asians, but it was a Black-centric neighborhood in that it wasn't just that everyone was Black, but it was also pro-African. I was part of an organization inside of Lamar Park that works with kids in that neighborhood as the only Asian board member down there. So I loved it. It was great, and I enjoyed a lot of the work that we did down there. I did notice that a lot of what that neighborhood wanted were strong Black mentors, not necessarily me as the Asian tech person to mentor those kids. Not to say like I couldn't make a positive impact on those kinds of things. I think I totally can. But I started to notice that aspect of, am I the best person for these kids and for this neighborhood? The second thing is the disconnect between my work meant that if I had a conversation with someone at work or through work stuff, I typically couldn't invite them to my church because most of the people are not coming to South Central for church.
Right.
They're not driving down there. And so I wasn't able to connect. I actually had sent a bunch of people to Tapestry that I met through work because I heard about it through Mike and he was having a great experience. So I was like, you should go and check out Tapestry. And I hadn't even been. But that started a thought in my mind around, okay, where can I disciple people and make that connection? And then I'd say that our church was going through a time where I felt like it wasn't, like the church wasn't going to make it. And all those factors coming together made me start thinking about, okay, what would it look like for me to, because I was working in Culver at the time. My office was in Culver. So what would it look like for us to live and work and do ministry in a kind of continuous,
holistic,
more holistic way? And so through praying about that, I started to have those thoughts. And a lot of it came down to like, what is the practical impact or what is the practical way I can disciple people?
Yeah.
And I think there are great things about moving to a place like South LA and doing that. And then there's also what is the impact that I'm making in this neighborhood and where can I have the greatest impact? And I think a lot about like, I am Asian and I can sort of hide from that and do other things and go towards other places. But as a business leader that happens to be Asian, which there are not a ton of, I was able to very easily, if I'm meeting up with an Asian person at work or any other person that's more close from a cultural standpoint to me, talk to them about Jesus and invite them to church in a way that was very fluid and where I had much more authority in that way. And so I had felt like I need to be using this. Right. And Carolina had noticed it too as well. And it was really hard for her because she had noticed that I wasn't using that side of things from a church perspective. And it seemed like a waste. And at the same time, she loved our community, our church, and all of that. So that there was, so it's hard, but we spent time praying about it and thinking through it and we had a transition period and all that. And now we're here and there's things we love about it and things we are like, this is different. Yeah.
Thank you for walking us through that thought process.
Yeah.
I know Nolan had a million questions, but one of the things that I've noticed from hearing your story is that you are very mindful about the choices that you make in terms of like where I want to live, what I want to do, even Carolyn, who I want to marry, where I want to raise my kids and why. And it seems like you live out your life based on those questions and convictions.
Mm.
And it's very humbling to hear because as somebody who is a mom of young kids and trying to figure out what it is. And I always say what I want the most for my children is for them to love and know Christ. And we have made certain decisions around that.
Yeah.
A part of the reason, too, we send them to a bilingual school is my husband speaks Spanish fluently. And I have living in Honduras for 3 years, can be conversational in Spanish.
Yeah.
And so we've thought if God ever sends us, we want our kids to have Spanish in their back pockets, too, that we can pull out. How would you help people really come to those questions that would help steer the choices that they make, whether it's a mate, whether it is a job, a neighborhood that they would purchase a home in? Because on a side note, the other reason I am so humbled by you and David, who we'll be having on our next podcast, but is that you guys both are very capable people, very like successful in the business world. You guys have access to the things that many of us are on the hamster wheel trying to get to, and you have had that, and you could be in a very comfortable, nice, I'm sure, multi-million-dollar home living comfortably. But I love that the choices that you guys are making are so countercultural to that, and it seems so clear that you are living not for yourselves. So yeah, how would you help people who are in these process kind of answer those questions?
Yeah.
Countercultural, or even like
Yeah,
now,
in this
it's like
case,
possibly cultural. Quote,
Yes,
That's true.
that's
Yeah,
true.
I was gonna say
Being
that's right.
able to walk through that thought process.
Yeah, I'd say that there's big decisions in life, and then there's like daily decisions.
Yes.
I think generally speaking, the ones that are daily are the most important ones, and those are the basic things. And the Bible saying that if we're given a little and we do something with that, we'll be given more. I think they're just basic things that you make decisions with every day. Like, are you spending time with the Word, and are you serving your wife and loving her and washing the dishes when you're tired and you don't feel like it? Or are you making daily decisions to grow in your walk? I think those lead to the bigger decisions, and those big decisions are, I think they tend to be hard in some ways, but easier in some ways too. Hard because they impact your life in a lot of ways, but easy because they're easily identifiable as things that you should be praying about. I think at the end of the day, I think micro decisions are the hard ones, and we have to pursue God in those things. But I think if you're doing those things, every single major decision should be approached with deep thought and prayer at the end of the day. And an example of that for us has been like just even something silly like naming our kids. Our kids have strange names: Talitha, Moses, Ephraim. There's a lot of ministry that can happen in naming your kids. Like the amount of times we get asked what Talitha's name means and why we named her that. And so there's two parts to it. One is there's evangelistic stuff that can happen as a result of having a strange name. And that's part of the reason why we have the names that we have. There's also what is the impact to the kid in terms of what does the name mean and how will that impact their lives as naming is it's one of those things where you don't think much about it, but naming is one of the most important things you'll do. I was thinking the other day, like, you name a child something and they will have that name for eternity. Mm-hmm. Like, what a crazy decision to make, like there's not a lot of things in life that you make
unless Jesus changes it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Because Jesus, I sometimes I'm like, wow, I can't believe Jesus is like, nope, you're no longer, I'm going to now call you
that's
Peter.
True.
I just think that's so funny that I kind of say like, I would be annoyed as his mom because I'm like, no.
That's true. Yeah, that's fair. That is fair. Yeah.
But
at least in this life, unless they have a dream or they decide to change their name for whatever reason.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's small. I mean, that's a big decision in that you have to make that decision. But I think it applies to everything: your job, where you live, how many kids you should have, the kids' names. Those, again, they're easy because they're big decisions.
Yeah.
But I think it becomes easier if you're making the small decisions every day. Yeah.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah.
How would we know, or what are some signs for you and Carolyn that you are living for your own story versus
Yeah.
living for God's story?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's very difficult to parse that out sometimes because you could easily justify any decision as being one that you do for God. I'd say many of the time, the harder decision tends to be the one that is the one that God wants you to do. That's not always true, but it is true in many cases where the thing that you maybe find to be the harder decision tends to be the one that, and I think if you're even struggling with that, I think you're probably on the right path of trying to figure out like here are two decisions. One of them is harder than the other one. If you're even struggling with that, I think you're on the right path. But oftentimes it is the harder one that tends to be the right one. But again, like, right now we're living in a nicer neighborhood and all of that. And I think we do have and I think it's worth questioning our own motives too, as well. Because again, we can justify anything. Like, you're going to buy a nicer car and you're thinking about, if I have a nicer car, maybe I could drive more people. Maybe they'll be more comfortable. And, you could start rationalizing anything, right? At the end of the day. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. I think if you're having real critical thinking that's going towards something, I think that the thing that's easier and nicer could be the thing that God wants you to do. And so, I think we also think a lot about what is our unique place as Christians, and what is our unique contribution as to the church, to the body, given both the gifts that we have and the resources that we have. What is our unique contribution? I think those things all play into it. But I think these things are like wrestling. There's never this like easy, like always make the hard decision. No, like sometimes it's not the hard decision, or at least in the world's eyes, the hard decision. But I think it's daily wrestling. It's daily thinking about these things. A big part of it is I think many people go through life doing things without thinking about it. So like, you go to work, you come home, you watch Netflix, you go to sleep, and you start over, and there's no thought as to, should I be watching Netflix, or should I be working this job? Or it's really constantly questioning those things and bringing it to God and saying, is this something you want me to be doing?
So how do you balance that? Because one could, I imagine for myself, just could be questioning everything. Being neurotic about questioning everything.
Sure.
Versus going with the pre-programmed flow. How would you balance that? Or some tips or wisdom?
I think it has to be questioned out of a place of overflow and contentment, which goes to the daily connecting with God. I think if you're like, there's an easy like negative side of that where you're anxious and stressed about making the wrong decision, or you're feeling like shameful because you're just constantly feeling guilty about your decisions. And that's not right either. I think about, is it 1 Timothy 6 that says that for the rich in this age, not to trust in the hope of money, but then right after that, it says that God has given you these things as gifts as well. The money and the resources are given to you as a gift. It's not always about it is about accepting those gifts sometimes, I think, too, as well, and enjoying your life and being content. And at the same time, I think the questioning is a good thing. So I think if you're questioning out of a place of like guilt and what if I mess this up, I think that's not the right heart. That's not where God wants you to be. But if you're like, I want to tell people about Jesus, I want more opportunities for that, and what can I do in my life to do that, and you're just excited about it, I think that's just a totally different place. And it goes from anxiety to excitement and opportunity and those kinds of things. So,
Yeah, I love it's bringing me back to one of our rooted lessons, but the idea of like owner versus manager, and not just with money, right? Like, we are not the owners of our money. We have the gift of stewarding and managing the money that the Lord gives us. And if you have that attitude, then it's so much easier to tithe. Because I'm like, I don't own this money. I need to tithe and give back 10% to the Lord. But that's just about finances, but it being about our whole lives. As a parent, like Olive and Milo are not. I am not their owner. They are the Lord's ultimately, and my job is to help manage them until they're grown adults and live for God's kingdom on their own, or whatever it might be, like the gifts that He's given you as software engineering or whatever. I don't have that gift, but like we can, whatever God's gifts to us are, our capabilities, our bodies, to think 100% like, okay, this is yours, Lord, and I'm managing it. What is it that you want me to do with it? And having that posture is completely different than what I'm tempted to do. Like, I want to do this, God, so help me meet this goal. Or like, I really want my husband to have this job, so help him get this job, right? Which is, I feel like often American Christianity, we can find ourselves slipping into that kind of attitude.
Yeah, I love your sharing about how now your job and your church coming more holistically together, and speaking from Pastor Sam's sermon, where he talked about just very practical steps of thinking, how do I be a Christian witness in the workplace? Not just being the best XYZ that I could be, but actually going and praying, blessing, meeting the needs, and using our voice to share our faith.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear some stories that you thought through critically, given what you do, you're an entrepreneur. How have you used that platform to kind of go through these steps, people along?
Yeah, I think so. I do think that ministry leaders tend to have an unfair advantage when it comes to some of these things, and they don't always realize that, which is that a big entry point for a ministry leader is that they can say they work at a church. So if you're on an airplane and you're flying somewhere, and most people, in friendly conversation, will say, what do you do for work? And a ministry leader can say, I'm a pastor, or I work at a church. And that typically you have the opportunity to have some kind of conversation there. For most working people, that's not really.
But that might shut down some conversations too.
I know. I'm always scared. I was at the Magic Castle the other night, and I mean, I love Harry Potter, but I'm also very scared about magic. And somebody asked me, what do you do? And I was like, I don't want to tell them I work at a church because I don't want them to feel immediately judged.
Right.
That they're a magician. I don't know.
Yeah. Don't think that. It doesn't matter. They won't meet you again anyways, probably.
That's true.
But I will say, because I worked at a church. I worked at Reality LA for a little bit. And
Under Tim Chaddock?
Yeah, when Tim was there. And I had that experience of people ask me what I did for work. And I would say I work at a church in Hollywood. And it would lead to, sometimes it would be like, they're ignoring me and they don't care. But sometimes it would lead to conversation. So I do think, in a similar fashion, though, I think practically, I think of a lot of things from in business, you think of a lot of things about the customer journey and what are the things that come up. And I think in ministry, you can have those similar things around what are the common questions that come up? What are places that I have to have a conversation about Jesus? And those are outside of the normal things of be excellent at your job, love people. Those things will have the aroma of Christ. But I agree with what Sam said in that, like, you have to preach. You have to have an entry point to actually say something. And I think that we use, I think, politically correct kind of culture to excuse us from being bold about saying who we are as Christians, I think, a lot of the time. That's just because we're ashamed of our faith, or we're afraid of being embarrassed, or we're not. Those things are definitely, and everyone feels that. So, and no one, that's normal. That it's like, what will someone think about me if they know I'm a Christian, or those kinds of things. So that's true for anybody. But yeah, I do think like thinking through what the journey is. Okay, where am I going to meet new people? So there's some people that their whole community is church, and they never have any opportunities to engage with not people that don't know Jesus. So in the business world, that's top of funnel. Like, what's the network of people that you even have to talk to about Jesus? Then the next side is like, are you excellent at your job, reflecting Jesus well, and those kinds of things? That's obviously important. Are you praying for people? What Sam's message is. The next part is like, what are the normal conversations that will come up about, again, like I had mentioned, where do you live as a normal one that people bring up, names of your kids, different things. What are places in conversation where someone will say, oh, that's interesting. I think the most like normal example that people give is like, I went to church on Sunday for like, what did you do this weekend? I think that's an easy one. But I think there should be a whole slew of tools that we have that we should be constantly thinking about. Like, where is my entry point into presenting my faith? And then the last part of that is actually being willing to disciple someone. That's the one where I struggle with the most, because there's been many instances where people have been very interested in my faith. Maybe I've prayed for someone because they're going through a hard time. I say, hey, can I pray for you about this? Like one of my coworkers had a health issue recently. I'm a CEO, so there's risk in praying for people, I think. But I just said, hey, are you open to me praying for you? And most people are very open to that kind of stuff at the end of the day. And even if you feel like a fool doing it, but even if they hate Christians or they don't want anything to do with it, they'll still let you pray for them. There's entry points like that. Can I pray for you? I prayed for them. And then there's coworkers of mine that had found out I'm a Christian that wanted to spend more time with me. And oftentimes, even in some of those cases, I won't take the time to do it because my life is quote unquote too busy. And I think for me, the conviction there has been like, what is more important than someone that wants to know about Jesus?
Right.
That is the most eternal impact thing that I could be doing. And where are my values, right? Do I have kingdom values? Because I have a busy day, I have meetings and work and stuff I have to do. And so that's convicting on my end. You can think about that entire journey, and different people can struggle at different points. So some people might struggle with the fact that they have no non-Christian friends. And it's like, go find a hobby, rock climb, go play tennis, whatever, play golf, whatever it might be. Some people are going to struggle with, they don't want to be bold about their faith. They don't have entry points and think about what are the places I can use to talk about Jesus. And then some people are going to struggle around discipleship takes a lot of time. After somebody wants to learn about Christianity, most of the time people need to study the Bible together with you to actually become a Christian. And that means you have to walk through a gospel with somebody, which means like weekly study with somebody. And that's like tons and tons of time. Yeah. You're not always going to be I like Sam's message around like you have different points where you might talk to somebody. You're not going to always be the one that takes someone from A to Z kind of thing. But you can be too. And it should be an exciting thing to experience someone coming to know Jesus. So yeah.
Yeah. I definitely personally find the discipleship part the hardest.
Yeah,
because
totally.
It seems very intimidating to say, hey, you want to read this Bible, the thing that I
don't also fully understand.
Stories.
Yeah, I mean, I think it can start. I'm doing one right now with one of my coworkers. But yeah, we're going through the Gospel of Luke together, and he just asked me questions after question. And it's, do you really trust that the Bible is like fully accurate end to end? And we have a conversation about that. And all sorts of questions. What's just the best translation and why? Like going through different stories and yeah, those are hard. I mean, you have to sort of be ready to answer questions. And sometimes it's like, I don't know the answer to that. I'll get back to you. And hopefully if you do it more, you get better practice and things like that. But yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, I would even point them to going to Alpha, because even if you are a believer, but Alpha does a really good job of presenting those questions, and they do their studies. Like they will historically unpack certain things in their videos. So I always point people to Alpha. Even if you are a Christian, go learn, because a lot of you probably don't have this information right on the top of your head.
Yeah.
And listen and take notes, and then converse with people. Tapestry too, we have Alpha. Converse with people who are not believers.
Do you know Alpha?
We are doing Alpha this year. Pastor Shireen will know more information. There's the plug. And plug for STMs as well.
You can invite them to church too. I mean, I do think that's not, I think, studying the Bible is very hard, and maybe not a lot of people feel equipped to do that for sure. I totally understand that. But I would also say, if you don't feel equipped to do it, then maybe you should be reading your Bible more too.
And Tapestry, we have Equip. So pushing them into a Bible study. One of the things to end, I was thinking I just saw on Instagram this thing of if you're too tired at home to play with your kids, which playing with your kids, as you know, Eden, it takes a lot of effort and work, then your work-life balance is not great. That means you should probably cut down on your work. If you come home and you're like, I'm too tired to be with my children, then you need to reconfigure your life because your life should not be revolving around work. And when you were sharing a little bit about, I'm too busy, but you could have an eternal impact on somebody's life, discipling them, then maybe we should be asking those questions we were referring to earlier. What am I doing with my life that reflects the kingdom work? Are there people, whether it's coworkers, friends, even family members, the amount of people whose family members don't know Jesus, what are the areas in our lives that we need to shift to really, prove even to yourself that Jesus really is the apple of my eye?
Yeah, I think the whole kingdom values thing is an important question all the time. And I, for sure, struggle with this as someone that has a high emphasis on work. In some ways you have to, leading a company and whatnot. But I think it's a very good question, and one that convicts me a lot, to be like, are my personal values aligned with God's kingdom values? And again, like something like someone's interested in Christianity. I'm like, I don't have time for that right now. In that scenario, it's like, no, it's not. And again, it's the same with the kids, right? Your kids. If your kids don't feel poured into because you're so tired, that's a values question, right? If your wife, in my case, doesn't feel like she has space to connect with me or space to connect with God because she's wrangling kids all day, there's a values question and there's a planning question around all that too as well. So yeah. It's a constant question, that is.
And yeah, to wrap it up, I just feel like what I'm hearing you say in this conversation, my biggest takeaway is, if you really say that Jesus is king of your lives, we've been saying the kingdom phrase a lot, and if he really is king and lord of our lives, then everything that we do should be a reflection of that. So the way that we spend our time, that we spend our money, the kinds of jobs we pursue, the kinds of spouse that we want to marry, even like you said, the number of children, all of those things. And then the day-to-day. If he really is king of my life, am I coming to pray? Am I reading my scripture? Am I in community, allowing people to speak truth into my life and shape me if I am, sinning? So yeah, I loved today's conversation. And thank you so much, Eden, for taking the time out of your very busy day.
Yes. Yeah. Eden is such just a trailblazer, and helps me think practically about my next years as I think about my career, and how you think so intentionally about every single step, how nothing's off the table for God, and really thinking through that.
Yeah, I love that, intentional. I think that's like the word, be intentional about living our lives for God's kingdom.